A Story About My Uncle is an adventure platformer developed by Gone North Games and published by Goat Simulator Studios. Well, currently Gone North has been rebranded as Coffee Stain North. I got to play it thanks to a Humble Bundle giveaway, but I remembered that it existed because one of my friends told me about it while we were discussing about some good indie games to try out. Not only was that why I decided to pick it up, but hearing that this was a platformer and that it worked similar to Portal's gameplay, I was even more intrigued to play it. But anyway, let's get into the video and find out how Story About My Uncle stands as Coffee Stain North's debut game. A Story About My Uncle begins with an unnamed protagonist narrating to his daughter about a fictional story, where he looks for his missing Uncle Fred in a distant world. He finds some of the tech that Fred used there and travels throughout it using them. Along the journey, he discovers a village of salamanders, and one of the citizens named Madeline decides to join him for a while. The game ends with the protagonist finally reuniting with his uncle for a bit, but Fred tells him to go back home. And that's about it. So let's start with what I liked about the story and writing. It's got a pretty interesting premise despite it not being quite the most original story. I mean, it's almost exactly like the hero's journey trope, but I don't mean that in a bad way. The entire story is also very open-ended, so different players have different interpretations of it. The most common theory about it is that the protagonist's narration of the story is a cover-up of the actual reason why his uncle disappeared, which was during a climbing accident. But again, this is just theory.
A game theory!
Even the writer and artist of Coffee Stain North, who is Elin Amberg, I'm sorry if I butchered your name, she intends for players to come up with their own ideas about the story. I think this approach in storytelling is creative, and I won't be able to talk much about it because this all sounds interesting and I want to research about it for an upcoming video. I will make a few brief statements about it, however, so let's go ahead. Allowing the players to discuss their point of view on the story is an interesting take, because not only does it show in the players' creativity, but it also tells us something about the devs. It tells us that these people aren't assholes who are creating a game so you can play this one story in this exact way. Now, there isn't much that I dislike about it, but I still have to point out one small issue I have with the plot and lore. I know I said that people would understand the plot differently due to its ambiguity, and I don't mind it being that way. Take the story how you want it to be. But I feel that people may not delve into the characters easily if they haven't explored enough to interact with objects that could add more to its lore. In my first playthrough, I found quite a lot of stuff that made me understand the narrator and his uncle's relationship. It doesn't really affect what you interpret of the ending or the overall story, but it's more interesting to learn about them, and players who never touched anything when free roaming might feel that the world isn't that enriching. I guess the devs had that in mind for those who explore their surroundings a lot, but not really for the story. I could also point out that the story is short, but that works more as a gameplay problem than with the story itself. Speaking of which, this brings us to the next section of the video, the gameplay. The game works similarly to those kinds of puzzles that use a handheld-like device, which isn't a gun but looks like one, like Portal or Half-Life. The Story About My Uncle uses a power suit that Uncle Fred made for his journey, which not only consists of a glove that can grapple to glowing objects or boost your jump, but it also has rocket boots that can make you fly for a brief amount of time. There's not a lot you can do in gameplay, but it isn't that gameplay focused, so I'll give that a pass. That being said, the power suit really makes the game more fun and exciting to roam about throughout the levels. It's just great to be swinging between different objects and moving at a really fast pace. This also makes it really easier for quicker speedruns. What I especially like about the gameplay is that it offers a decent amount of replayability with collectibles in the campaign and a time trial for each level. These collectibles aren't just time wasters, they can unlock some certain unlockables, like extra gameplay mechanics, which aren't really that enhancing, but it gives you some fun to go with. There's also some achievements that have some challenge to it, but unfortunately, there are some problems that the game faces. Because of the short plot and there isn't much of a challenge apart from what I've stated earlier, this makes the campaign only about 4 hours long. It's gonna be pretty difficult to keep revisiting since even most of the side content would only add about a couple of hours. You also can't return to any of the levels during the campaign. And while this isn't a major issue because you can do it anyway with the level select menu, I feel like there should be a means of moving in between them so you can collect anything that you missed or interact with more objects. Finally, the game doesn't offer any creative ways to use your power suit, such as puzzles. Apart from Maddie's challenge and the achievements, it would have been interesting to see how we could use it in puzzles similar to the ones in Portal. And these could not only stretch the gameplay pacing, but it could also add some challenge. A lot more challenge. You could probably use the glove to power certain objects to unlock some doors, or quickly navigate through a time puzzle, which closes down the door to the next level. Or any of the other creative ways that you can use the suit, which I can't think of right now. All in all, the gameplay is fine and doesn't cause a lot of bugs for a pretty small indie game. But it also doesn't have enough content to keep you coming back for more. For a small-scale indie game in 2014, it looks pretty good and has a lot going for it in terms of visuals. From the lush foliage of the sanctuary to the bright, colorful environment of Starhaven, each level brings out the most in how it looks. The characters also look alright in this stylistic art direction. The game also has a decent soundtrack composed by Santiago Ferrero, who I wasn't able to find any of his previous works apart from his YouTube channel, which has a few videos including the trailer of the game, but he made quite a musical ambience. It's kind of hard to pick which tracks are far better because each of them makes the levels feel more alive, and I like them all because of that. But if I had to choose one while I was put the gun to my head, one of the tracks would be Welcome Home. Something about those echoing cello notes speak how grand the map of Star Haven is. There isn't much that I can say about the voice acting, on the other hand, but that doesn't mean I dislike it completely. Most of the characters' voice work get the job done, and I don't mind that. The narrator especially is actually pretty good in his acting, so I think that's also what I can say about voice acting. However, I do still have problems with some of the characters in terms of voicing and animation, and one of the problems is from Madeline the Salamander. Her voice acting is a bit off because it doesn't fit with her facial and body expressions sometimes. And at one instance, she sounds even like a skater girl. For no reason, I don't know.
Whoa, dude. I think I figured out what that writing was going on about.
Speaking of the animation, there are some instances where the characters don't move smoothly or aren't fluidly animated. Finally, I feel like there isn't enough of the soundtrack, and I kinda understand this is probably due to the game's length, but the soundtrack is just too good to only have about 10 tracks. This isn't a major issue again, but I feel like there should be at least 5 extra tracks just for like alternatives of the main soundtrack, or maybe some new ones. I don't know, I'm just giving suggestions for why I thought there wasn't enough of the music. The art direction and music is great, but the animation needs a lot of work and, polish. A Story About My Uncle isn't that type of indie game that packs a lot of content or doesn't seem to test you with anything difficult, but it is still a good game to play. The music is atmospheric, the gameplay isn't innovative, but it's fun, and the story's ambiguity allows many players to come up with their own theories based on their gameplay experience and the bits of lore everywhere. If you admire games that are short enough for something as quick as a speedrun, something that contains an open-ended narrative, or are looking for any good indie games in general, then this game might be just for you. Man, I really love Coffee Stain North for what they've done, producing that decently crafted and playable story. I'm really excited to see what their next project could be. Oh, it's a drill. Well, I'm excited to see that for E3 2019. Hope this game makes you feel like the drill.